Hello and welcome to my review of The Plane Effect. All the gameplay in this video was captured on a PlayStation 5 console, but the game's also available on the Xbox Series consoles, Nintendo Switch, and PC. However, it's not available on PS4 or Xbox One at the time of recording. I also need to let you know that a review code was provided to me by the publisher. This is another one of those reviews where I have a friend step in to play the game and record the footage. After that's been done, I look over all the footage myself and have an extensive conversation with that friend about the game, and then I produce a review based on a mixture of our opinions. So thanks again to TaylorMade Gaming for the help, and I'll have a link to their channel in the video description down below. And of course, if you enjoy the video or find it useful, please do consider subscribing to the channel. So what is The Plane Effect? Well, it's an adventure puzzle game with some platforming elements and an isometric viewpoint. You play as Solo, an office worker in a dystopian future who attempts to make his way home after his last day of work. During your time with the game, you'll be solving puzzles, doing some light platforming, and trying to figure out what's going on. It's actually quite difficult to say too much about this game without spoiling the things you'll experience. However, I'll do my best to explain it. The further you progress into the game, the more the game plays with your perception of reality and purposely makes you question everything you're seeing. As Solo, you'll be battling through what can only be described as dreams or perhaps nightmares in your quest to make it home. The gameplay is very simple, and the only things that you can do are walk, run, jump, and interact with certain objects. There's really no combat in the game to speak of, but there are hazards that need to be avoided. There's also some boss encounters, but they're virtually puzzles in and of themselves. And again, without spoiling anything, the puzzles can actually be quite odd and often require you to think outside the box in most cases. The game has no inventory system and no maps of any kind. Generally, to progress, you basically just have to experiment and find your way on your own. There are, however, some options that you can use at any time to make things easier. You can choose to play the game with either no hints, narrative hints, or guided hints. The no hints option is exactly what it sounds like. You progress through the game with no help at all, and guided hints show you pretty much exactly where to go. That of course means that narrative hints are somewhere in the middle. As you play, you'll also notice some cutscenes here and there to keep things moving, but honestly there really isn't much more I can say about the game. It really just is as simple as it sounds. You walk from one weird place to the next, solving puzzles, and that's really about it. So with that in mind, it's probably a good idea to move into the personal opinion section, starting with the positives. This first point is probably going to be obvious to anyone watching this video, but I found the art style to be very good indeed. Each and every world or plane that you visit feels and looks unique. You'll never be able to guess exactly where you'll end up next. Every area had something to say visually, and I thought they were really interesting to explore. It's kind of like walking around an art museum that you've never visited before, and each individual area was its own piece that clearly had a meaning behind it, even if I had no idea what that meaning was. Each environment has its own identity, atmosphere, and genre. It ranged from things like sci-fi to fantasy to horror and more besides. And what's really impressive is that the game manages to do all of this with a very minimalistic visual design, and it's probably one of its strongest components. Another thing that I noticed from the very beginning that I really enjoyed was the whole soundtrack. It was quite simply brilliant. And when I say soundtrack, I'm not just talking about the music. I'm also including the sound effects and the ambient noises. Each and every track or small sound effect was just very well placed and really set the mood for the various weird and wonderful places that you trudge through. When you mix this exceptional music and sound design with the great visuals, it just creates what amounts to a very striking piece of art. I found it very enjoyable to look at and listen to. And lastly, in the positive section, this one is a bit of a double-edged sword, and it's going to appear here and in the negative section, but for different reasons. The game was actually a bit longer and more involved than I initially thought. I expected perhaps a quick 2-hour experience, something like that, but my first playthrough took me roughly 8 hours using the no hints mode. Although if you have the guided mode on, I would think you could probably get through the game in around 4 to 5 hours. The main thing to note here is that I was genuinely really interested to see each new area, so I actually found it a pretty good thing that the game was longer than I expected. However, it's not 100% a good thing, as I'll try to explain now in the negative section. So while I just said that I liked the game being longer, it also worked against it in a few ways. Firstly, there were quite a few sections that just felt padded out and didn't really serve much purpose. There was a section that involves driving a car down a road, and it actually took me a few seconds before I realized I was even in control of the car. And then it just seemed to keep going, and I started thinking to myself, am I supposed to be doing something here or what? I really couldn't tell what I was meant to do, if anything. But as it turns out, no, you just keep going and eventually it changes to something else. And following on with that same idea, there was also another section where you had to follow a pipe underwater, and granted you do have to avoid some hazards while you do it, but again it just went on for I think over 10 minutes, and it just felt superfluous and dull to me. And of course I do understand that some people may just see it as part of the journey, and due to the style of the game and the genre of the game, I can definitely see that train of thought. My issue was that you're just not spending any time solving anything, you're just kinda moving forward from A to B and not really doing much in between. And again, along the same line, some of the areas that you had to explore just felt very bland, yet at the same time there were others that felt really interesting. And on top of that, some of the areas that felt boring and bland to explore also seemed far too large for the tasks that you had to complete within them. And this unfortunately led to some sections feeling like a complete slog. My second negative point is the puzzle solutions. So as I've said already, the game has no inventory system, but there is plenty of items that you can see in the game world that you can interact with. The issue is that you can't actually pick them up until the game allows you to. In a lot of puzzle games that I've personally played, you can pick up most pieces and examine them and then try to figure out where to use them. In the Plane Effect, however, you simply can't acquire any of the items that the game doesn't want you to have yet, which causes a lot of weird backtracking. I understand that this is just a different style of puzzle game, and that's absolutely fine, but for me and my personal tastes, I didn't really like the way it was implemented. A lot of the time you can actually see what you need to do, but the game won't let you do it unless you follow a specific order. As I said, it forces backtracking because you can't pick up an item you know you need, so you have to kind of find the items in the right order. And just because of how puzzles work in this game, I honestly felt that most of them didn't feel rewarding to complete. Instead, it was more of a case of, oh, thank God I'm past that section, but then sometimes the next section would be really cool and interesting, so it's a very weird situation to be in. The last issue I had was the game was controlling your character. Frankly, it just felt really off and imprecise. I mean, the things you can do with him are very limited, obviously, but even those limited things feel pretty awful. There's some sections that require you to run to or from something, and to do that you need to hold down a button. The problem is that quite often the game would fail to read my input, so I would hold down the button and nothing would happen. I then needed to repress the button multiple times to get it to actually work. Another example of this is when you move near an object that can be picked up or interacted with. A small symbol will display above it. Sometimes it works right away with no problem, but other times you can press the button over and over and it just doesn't work. You might have to get into the exact right spot that it needs you to be in, or move away and come back, and unfortunately this happened really often. Considering the less than ideal nature of the controls, the jumping sections really don't work too well in my opinion. The isometric view doesn't help things, and you need to actively compensate for the controls. The issue is that even when you do compensate for the controls, it doesn't always work out and causes these sections to become really frustrating very quickly. Some of these sections are really just painful to play through, and on top of that, the jump input has a bit of a delay to it, and often caused me to simply run off an edge before I could jump, and again, you need to compensate for this. Even though the game doesn't have a lot for you to do in the first place, I really don't feel like these platforming sections needed to be included, and it just doesn't seem a natural fit for this particular game. Personally, I think I would have just preferred some more puzzles in the place of these sections, but again, that's just me. And that's about it for the negative points, so let's move on to the conclusion and recommendation section. Overall, I think that the plane effect is more of an experience than it is a video game. It's very creative and will often make you question if you actually saw the stuff you just saw. Unfortunately, I feel like the controls really let the game down and the puzzles were a bit annoying for my personal tastes. Having said that though, the game's probably a bit better than I've made it sound. I mean, it's visually striking and the music is incredible, but it's just let down by some inconsistent level design and wonky controls. I found some sections to be really fun to complete, but found others to be absolutely frustrating, and this really is a difficult one to recommend. And I didn't want to mention this in the negative section because it could very well be our fault, but when I first started the game I had virtually no idea what was going on, and then when the credits rolled I had even less of an idea what was going on. It feels like the developers have tried way too hard to make this game appear clever, and ultimately for me it came off as kind of obtuse, unclear and messy. Now perhaps there's some deeper meaning to everything or some hidden messages here and there, but I have absolutely no clue what they might be. I mean, granted, I know the character's name is Solo and he's trying to get home, but other than that I really couldn't piece together any single part of the story, assuming that there actually is one there. As I played through I did discover some Polaroid photos of Solo's family, but some of the marketing for the game makes it out like he only thinks he has a family, so yeah, I really don't know. I found it very difficult to figure out what was going on. If anyone out there does decide to pick this game up and you manage to piece together anything, please do let us know in the comments section because we'd be really interested to know what's going on. I would guess that if there is something deeper to the game, there will be some people who make some really good theory videos on YouTube, and that would also be pretty interesting to see, so I'll keep a lookout for those. But as far as we could tell, there's really no alternate endings and no reason to replay the game unless you're going for trophies that you may have missed. And I guess if you're someone who just wants a weird and wild experience rather than a video game, or perhaps you're into those walking simulator style games that have a lot to say but not much in the way of gameplay, then I could see you actually finding some enjoyment here. If not, then I would actually find this one very hard to recommend to many people. For me, it was the curiosity about what would come next that drove me forward, but ultimately, at the end, there just wasn't really anything to find. And so there you go, that's my review of The Plane Effect. It's available right now on PS5, Xbox Series consoles, Nintendo Switch, and PC via digital download. However, at the time of recording, it's not available for PS4 or Xbox One. Of course, it's an indie game and it is priced accordingly. It's £11 in the UK and $15 in the US, and there's a 10% discount for PS Plus members right now if you're interested. There's also a free demo prologue that you can download if you're interested in giving it a try. If you have any questions about the game, please feel free to leave a comment and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, I hope today will be the day that I earn your subscription, and if you want to support the channel even further, all the important links are in the video description down below. But with all that said, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.